What's up, everybody? Welcome into the newest episode of Crunch Time with Kruck. If memory serves right, this should be episode 37. We have made it through 37 episodes of Crunch Time. And as mentioned previously, this is an audio-only podcast moving forward. It will still be on YouTube. Obviously, you're watching it on YouTube right now. But it will be audio only, so this picture will be up there for about 30-ish minutes. Joined at the table with Mad Max, Garrett Tipton, and none other than the hockey fanatic himself, Tim Hacksaw Hackett. How's everybody doing?
Doing good, Kruck. How you been, man?
Living life, man. Tim, how's it hanging?
It's going, man. Busy time of year for us, but looking forward to being part of the show and seeing how the other side works. So thank you for having me.
Love it. Tipton, welcome back.
Excited to be here. I think this is my second or third time on here. So, yeah, just kind of doing all the production stuff.
First
I
since
don't
the
know a
Subway
ton
episode.
about baseball and whatnot, but I'm here. So
I got to keep you on because my views go up. So let's get things started right out the gate.
It's all right. I'll counter that by bringing them back down again.
Back down again.
MLB Opening Day. Most of the pitchers for Opening Day have been released. What are some of the biggest standouts for you, Max? Which game is going to be the most fun?
Ooh, wow, Kruck. So, yeah, opening day obviously going to be on April 7th, looking at it. I mean, looking at some of the games here, it looks like the Brewers-Cubs could be an interesting game. You know, your Brewers, obviously, seeing how they can rebuild this year. And obviously, you look at the Cubs, a team that kind of didn't have their year last year. You know what I mean? They were obviously a team that everyone thought would be good, lost a lot of players in that trade kind of deadline fixture with obviously losing Rizzo, Schwarber, and all those people. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Cubs do. The Red Sox and Yankees, can't mess with that rivalry, right? All the time, that rivalry lives up to expectations. Expect the Yankees to hopefully do well again with Judge and Stanton there at the helm. And then, I mean, I'm looking at a team this year. I'm looking at how the Royals are into this year. Like, obviously, Kansas City area, it's like I'm very intrigued to see because you look at the Rays right now. The Rays are kind of that team in right now, AL, that's right, AL. That's like very good overall right now looking at. But I think the Royals, they're going to have some pieces. If they can get back their pitchers and whatever last year, this is a team I think could do well this season in that division. So those are a couple games I'm looking at. What do you guys think? You guys got any other matchups?
Yeah, there's a couple I was looking at. Let's see if I can pull them up once again. The Astros versus the Angels opening day. Left-handed Framber Valdez, is taking on the right-handed, magnificent, now the cover of the show 22, Shohei Ohtani. Looking at their stat lines, their ERA, one of them is 3.14, the other one's 3.18. They both started 22 games. They both pitched 132 1/3 innings, and then they both averaged around 9 strikeouts a game. I think that'll be a good one, and the other one I'm looking at is the Padres versus the Diamondbacks, which, you know, for the Padres, their starting pitcher is going to be Yu Darvish, who did not have that well of a year last year. And looking at the Diamondbacks, they're starting left-handed pitcher Madison Baumgartner. And I've always been a fan of this guy. Back when he was with the Giants, I always liked him. He had a perfect 7-inning game last year. And they didn't count it as a perfect game because obviously it wasn't long enough. And from there, he went downhill. So I think he's going to start hot again. I could see him going six innings easily in this game if he can come out electric with his stuff. Tim, any games stand out to you?
I think in terms of the best matchup of pitcher versus pitcher, I'd definitely go with what Max said. Red Sox and Yankees, Garrett Cole versus Nathan Eovaldi. Eovaldi is clearly the number one pitcher on the Red Sox this year with Chris Sale still on the shelf and Eduardo Rodriguez moving to the Tigers. So it's going to be Eovaldi to lead that pack, and obviously that's a divisional matchup to start the season. Red Sox versus Yankees, always MLB's premier series, rivalry series, whatever, always gets prime TV coverage. And like Max said, the Rays have been the team to beat in that division for the last couple of years, but it's so close between those two teams, the Rays and the Blue Jays now with all the stuff that they have done over the offseason. Then, of course, the Orioles also play in that division, but we can forget about them. So Red Sox versus Yankees, that all of these series are even more critically important than normal because often they help decide who might win the division. Now you might say it might even decide who takes second or maybe even third in the division, depending on how good you think the Blue Jays will be, how improved they are, and if you think the Rays will kind of fall off because of some of the detractions that they have suffered over the last year or so. So I don't think that series obviously will decide anything first game of the year, but Eovaldi versus Cole is a really good primetime matchup. And I think one that you mentioned a minute ago before we went on, Kruck, is something that kind of on the other end of the spectrum, in the sense that I'm not sure that this is going to be a playoff preview by any sense, but an intriguing matchup, I think, is the Mariners and the Twins. I don't expect a lot from the Twins this year, but they were in the playoffs a couple of years ago, and they've been around that playoff line, I guess, for the last few years. And to me, they're a question mark team this year. And against the Mariners, which has been kind of that under-the-radar, up-and-coming team for the last couple of years, and they have made a lot of additions as well. So they bring in Robbie Ray after a couple of years with the Blue Jays. He's going to start this year on opening day for the Mariners. And the Twins are going to counter with Joe Ryan, who they got in the as he was a prospect last year for the Rays, spent most of the year with my friends, the Durham Bulls, and that was the prime return for the Twins when they traded Nelson Cruz to the Rays, when they did a rare one-year rental thing to get Nelson Cruz, just to get bounced in the first round of the playoffs by the Red Sox. So if Joe Ryan sticks in this Minnesota rotation for the whole year and obviously into the future, what a win that is for the Twins. They got two good pitching prospects in return for Nelson Cruz, future Hall of Famer, and if those two guys stick for Minnesota this year and next year and beyond, that is a big win for them. If Joe Ryan's going to start for them opening day, then it's already one win for them.
That is a great point.
Yeah.
Shifting gears into the NCAA women's basketball tournament, we're down to the Final Four in both men's and women's side. We're going to start things off on the women's side because, well, I'll be honest with you, I think South Carolina is one of the best teams we've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
I would put this team, up against the UConn women's basketball team that went on the, 140 winning game streak?
Something like that, yeah.
But looking at the two matchups, South Carolina's taking on Louisville, and that'll be tonight at 6 o'clock, tonight being April 1st. And then UConn is the only 2 seed in it. They're taking on Stanford at 8:30 at night. Which game do you want to tackle, Max?
Kruck, I'm going to tackle the UConn-Stanford game. I'm actually intrigued. I think actually whoever wins that game, I think possibly can win it all. I think you mentioned if you look at South Carolina, they're a team that's very good. But obviously you look at South Carolina, went into the SEC championship game, lost to Kentucky, a team that was a 7 seed in the women's side. And so if you look at it, I'm looking at a time you're in the Final Four. This is an opportunity to look at. And you can't not mess with Gino Auriemma and what he's done over the years. Like, he's just a guy that's always been there for UConn. And obviously now they got Paige Beckers there. Azy Fudd, that's a very good, outstanding sophomore player as well. Both players are really good for that team. And I'm looking at it, but Stanford, though, is another team I like, too. And just how, what's the coach? Vanderbeer or something like that? Tara Vanderbeer. She's got another great history as well. So two iconic kind of coaches looking at in this matchup. And obviously, I think it's going to be a battle of who's going to play better defense, I think, overall. Stanford kind of plays a more up kind of tempo kind of game, but still likes to play back on defense as well. And UConn just likes to go out there and try to score as many points as they can and see how their defense plays at the end of games. So I think, I'm going to pick Stanford to win this game. I think it'll be very close. I think Stanford has something that's going to win. And if I had to choose the other matchup, I probably will say South Carolina because Louisville, to me, I mean, they're a good team. They got a lot of players. They made it, obviously, through the Wichita region in their section. So I say South Carolina and Stanford. I'm going to pick Stanford to win it all again. Remember, I'm going to think they're going to be back-to-back. Remember, last year, Stanford won it last year for the women's championship. I think Stanford can do it again. So what do you guys think? You guys agree with me, or do you guys got other disagreements as well?
I watched that UConn versus NC State game in the Elite Eight, and I think there's something to be said for UConn coming through the hardest road to get here. They had to survive NC State in double overtime, first double overtime game in NCAA women's basketball tournament history, all that stuff.
Long game.
Yeah, long game, a lot of fun. And they had the most challenging Elite Eight game of these 4 teams. The other 3 teams, albeit number 1 seeds, they more or less cruised through those games. South Carolina got 10 seed Creighton in the Elite Eight, beat them by 30. That was after they had to play UNC, North Carolina, in the previous round, and actually had a really tough game against the team from the state up north. So I think South Carolina is the best team in the field. No disrespect to Stanford, which they were the number one. They rose to number one in the country 2 years ago, and a lot of the players that were on that team at that time as freshmen are still on that team, or as underclassmen at least, like Cameron Brink and Haley Jones. They've been part of this powerhouse team,
players.
for a couple of years, and obviously now they get to go against UConn, which is the dynasty in women's college basketball, obviously, as you said. I mean, on the other side, though, I'll look at the Louisville-South Carolina matchup, I guess, because, like I said, I think South Carolina is the best team in the field. Aaliyah Boston, I think, is the best player in the country. And that alone does not tip the scales in favor of South Carolina to me. I don't have the ins and outs of the entire matchup, but I think I believe South Carolina will beat Louisville, and they would be my favorite to beat either Stanford or UConn in the championship game. But I do agree with Max that the winner of that Stanford-UConn game will be a lot of people's pick to win the championship game, and I firmly believe that both of those would be deserving candidates as well.
Looking at the South Carolina Louisville game, South Carolina has outscored their previous 4 opponents 277 to 165, a difference of 112 points. Not the biggest run in basketball history. Like, UConn has almost every single record or little totem that you could possibly get. Kind of like Tom Brady now in the NFL. Almost every game he takes the field, he's breaking some kind of record that you've never heard of. But you're like, well, I mean, it's Tom Brady.
What's he got now?
But I really love this South Carolina team because their defense is first and foremost. They're not going out and they're not putting up Stephen Curry 3-pointers from wherever they want to shoot. They're not, a new wave type of team. They're old school, fundamentally sound basketball team. If they shut you down on defense, they're looking to get 2 points. They're not looking for a 3-pointer. They're looking to get the ball down low, do some work. They're looking to wear out players. This Louisville team, I got to give credit where credit's due. They played Michigan, and they beat them by 12 points. That's a tough task. They played Tennessee, beat them by 12 points. That's another tough task. They whooped up on Gonzaga, beating them by about 9 points, and then obviously opening round against Alabama. Is that Alabama? It might be Albany. Yep, Albany, my bad. They played Albany Great Danes in the first round, and I mean, they were lucky to make it, let's be honest.
It's a 116 game,
Tough matchup for me.
I got the Gamecocks going all the way, and I think them and UConn is going to be a really good national championship. That's my pick. All right, let's shift gears into the men's side of the bracket, where there is only actually one seed left. The games are 2-seed Villanova versus 1-seed Kansas, and then 8-seed UNC versus 2-seed Duke. Mr. Tim Hackett, would you like to take on the UNC Duke game or the Villanova Kansas game?
I think you know which one I'm going to answer there.
I knew you were going at.
Being from the Triangle area myself, I'm a huge Villanova fan. I'm kidding. Duke UNC is a twice annual affair in that neck of the woods. It's a massive sporting event across the country, but I can tell you firsthand that people stop what they're doing to watch Duke and North Carolina play in men's basketball. Even folks in my family, the folks that aren't big sports fans, we have watched Duke UNC at different times over my life because it is that interesting, and all the facts about how close the all-time series is over the last 50 years, all that stuff. All the great players in college basketball that have come out of those two teams, the two great coaches over the last couple of years, Mike Krzyzewski and Roy Williams, before he stepped aside last year. The history is obvious there between those two teams. And so we, as a collective unit, and we as a fan of this sport, have been waiting for this matchup in the NCAA tournament literally forever. It has never happened before, which is crazy for me to believe. They don't get matched up in the same bracket, in the same quadrant very often, obviously. And the fact that they were matched up in the same half this year is surprising enough. The fact that Carolina made it to the Final Four as an 8 seed just to play Duke in the Final Four is the craziest thing of all to me. So, and obviously, Carolina closed the ACC by beating Duke at Cameron Indoor in Coach K's final game there. All the storylines, and beat them but good. Absolutely, no doubt about it. So, if you think that Carolina is phased by playing Duke in the Final Four, you're crazy. So, I still think Duke is a better team. The seeds obviously would reflect that. The overall records would reflect that. The stats would reflect that. expert preseason picks would reflect that as well. I think Duke has more star power. They'll have higher lottery picks this year if you value that. So Duke will have Duke will be the favorites in this game, I think. But again, if you don't count out Carolina ever if they're playing Duke. Even a couple of years ago when UNC was bad and Duke was okay, but a couple of years ago when UNC was like not a good team at all. They were a first round team of the ACC tournament a couple of years ago, which never happens. They still played Duke close that year. So I expect this is going to be a good game, especially after we had 0 good games in the Elite Eight. I would firmly expect both of these 2 games to be really good. And as great as Nova and Kansas both are in their own ways, if Duke wins this game, I fully expect them to be national title favorites. And I did not expect that going into this year. I'm not the big Duke fan who wants Coach K's last year to be with the national championship. I don't really care, to be honest. I think it's a really interesting story. Yeah. And, of course, Duke haters say it's rigged. But his team is just really good, and they are playing for him, even though they've got that extra spotlight on them, even brighter than normal than what comes with playing at Duke. So I'm really looking forward to this game, and I know that folks back home are as well.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, I got to agree with you, man. I mean, you look at it. Obviously, looking at that whole East region, right? We talk about, obviously, North Carolina, how that played out. Like, we had St. Peter's and you had North Carolina. Who would have thought, obviously, first of all, that would have been Elite Eight. I mean, obviously, with St. Peter's getting that far. But obviously, Duke, I mean, I was expecting them to win that side of the bracket either. I thought Gonzaga was going to be there, and obviously, we saw what happened earlier with Arkansas beating them. I mean, look at both of this matchup. You just mentioned it, right? The history is there. And I guess diving deep more into the matchup itself, I kind of looked at the 2 big men in this game. I kind of look at Mark Williams and obviously Armando Bacot. Both of those guys are very huge pieces on these teams, especially Armando Bacot, a guy that's obviously a double-double all the time playing against these both teams. I think he's got to be a big part in this game, especially to take Duke, who likes to shoot kind of outside three-pointers or try to bring it inside and be aggressive, especially with Banchero and Jeremy Roach as well. Both 2 guys that can take it to the hoop very well. I think Mark Williams is the guy that's got to be a rim protector. He's got to stay up there and take care of business against Armando Bacot. Because that guy's just going to come up there and get a rebound and try to pass it back out. And Caleb Love, a guy you can't sleep on in the tournament, that guy is shooting out, like lights out the past 2 games.
He's been excellent.
So that's another guy to keep an eye on. And to dive more just quickly into this Nova-Kansas game, I look at it, I think a lot of people are still sleeping on how Kansas was. And if I had to look at all the 1 seeds in these tournaments, I thought Kansas was the one that came in that wasn't talked about a lot.
Sure.
And I think it was because you look at how their team is. They kind of were asleep behind in the Big 12 in the tournament. They were good, but not there. Baylor was the one that was kind of shining over top of them. And I think if you look at Kansas, that last game they played against Miami, my fault, they did shut out Miami in the second half like crazy. And if they play like that type of defense, I think that's a championship caliber team right there and shooting out. But Villanova plays a different style of ball. This is why I like it. This game's going to be a different style game. Villanova plays, he likes to slow you down, likes to play like defensive game. Jay Wright, that's kind of his mentality. Kansas, quick transition offense. So I see a difference between 2 styles. If I had to choose, I am going to pick Duke and Kansas. I think Kansas will find a way to beat Nova. But I don't know. Tim, I got to agree with you. There's something about Duke going on so far. I mean, Kruck, do you got any final thoughts here?
You definitely touched on a point I want to talk about. Villanova, in their last 5 games, have only scored over 70 points twice. In the last 5 games for Kansas, they've only scored under 70 points once. I mean, this Kansas team is just offensive oriented, and it's mostly behind their guard. I'm gonna butcher his name, but Agbaji.
Ochai Agbaji. Yep.
Agbaji. This man is putting up 20 points a game. He's averaging 18.9 points a game.
Yeah.
And he's not just throwing up garbage and seeing what sticks. He's shooting 47% from the field. So he's in the gym. He's putting in work.
He's shooting that there.
And looking at some of the money lines, I'm not a huge gambler, but I just love because it explains a lot about the game.
Sure.
There's only a 4-point spread. Kansas is favored by 4, which doesn't make sense because one team is scoring a lot and the other team is not scoring at all. So it just depends whose pace of play is going to be picked up.
Yeah,
is it going to be a slow defensive game or is it going to be ran fast, going like a chicken with its head cut off fast? Yeah. The over-under is 134. So that means both teams are probably going to score right around 65 points. That's what they're expecting. But the prediction, right? On ESPN, they have percentages who's going to win.
Fan poll.
It is 50.8 to 49.2. They have Villanova with the advantage.
Wow, that is.
But in the money line, they
close
are.
as a margin.
In the money line, they're losing the spread, but in the fan polls, they're up by 0.8%.
Yeah.
This is crazy to me. I think this game will go down as one of the better games this weekend, and that's saying something because we have one of the biggest rivalries in college basketball playing as well. If you like basketball, this weekend's going to be a fun weekend.
Sign up, I think both, like I said real quick, both of these games are going to be going down to the wire, I think. I think you're right, Tim, when you mentioned that both the Elite Eight games were kind of like, kind of not the Elite Eight that we were kind of expecting.
None of them were very close.
Not them were very close to be to that standard. I think, obviously, like you mentioned, Kruck, I think looking the thing about Villanova a lot is how you can't – they always stay up in a game. When they were playing against Houston, you thought, hey, Houston might have had a comeback. They thought they had something going on. But Villanova took care of that so well. And I thought that was very interesting to watch. But I think just looking at it, there's something about this year for Coach K. It's his time, and he has to go with it. So I'm obviously, like I said, I'll pick Duke to win. Even though, hey, it'd be cool to have Kansas win. It's close by, obviously, to our campus, so, it'd be very cool to possibly go over and see what it's about. But, I still pick Duke to win it all. So
yeah, my last point, I want to echo what Kruck said because even though I started this segment by talking about the magnificence that is Duke versus UNC and its status in college basketball lore, I think your point is exactly right, Kruck. The other game, I think, is going to be more significant because you could easily make the argument that I think you could very easily make the argument that Villanova and Kansas are both better teams than either Duke or UNC. So therefore, the winner of that game should probably be the favorite to win, whoever it is, Villanova or Kansas. Now, can you still make that argument after the injury that Villanova suffered last round? They're going to be missing a starter for the rest of this tournament. That's a huge loss for them, obviously, one of their key players. So are they still one of the two best of the four teams? I don't know, but regardless, to your point, it's crazy to me because this is the first ever time Duke UNC in the NCAA tournament, because it's Coach K versus UNC in the Final Four, all that other stuff. They're the second game on the slate. That's the nightcap. That's the featured event, Duke versus UNC. Mm-hmm. Even though the other game is a 1 versus 2, two other schools that have been elites in men's college basketball for the last 15 years, Kansas and Villanova, are in the other game. So it just shows you how much attention is being put on Duke versus UNC, maybe unfairly, because those other two teams are better. So you could easily make the argument that whoever wins between Villanova and Kansas will be favored to win by actual pundits, even though I think if Duke beats UNC, they will have the fan vote going in regardless because it's just Duke and they've got the storylines going in, even though, of course, tournament's rigged to get Duke this far. That's always the mentality.
Oh, yeah. No, I could agree with you there for sure.
Well, let's transition from the Final Four to the Frozen Four, where a sport we really don't talk about that much on the podcast, but really is one of our favorite sports, hockey. The Frozen Four are the following: Michigan, Minnesota, Minnesota State, and Denver. Tim, you know the most about hockey. Which one of these teams from both sides do you expect in the final, and then which team do you expect to come out on top?
It's just like we saw in women's basketball, where we've seen a couple of the best teams preseason in the country be one of the best teams, the last few teams standing, talking about Stanford and South Carolina in women's basketball. That's where we're at right now in men's college hockey as well. Michigan was always supposed to be one of the best teams in the country. They've got a couple of lottery picks on their team. Those guys have played extremely well, and they're the number one seed in the tournament. So they have done it. They have lived up to those expectations. I think falling in the semifinal probably would be a failure in that regard, but you've got three of your 4-1 seeds in the Final Four, just like we saw in the women's basketball field, and all four of these teams are really good. I think I haven't gotten to watch very much this year, as much as I would like, but I know the most about Michigan in terms of roster and personnel. Again, their offense is fantastic. They have a bunch of different scoring lines and a bunch of guys who I think you will see in the NHL draft in the next year or so, other guys who have been playing in the amateur ranks over the last couple of years before moving on to the NCAA, like most of these top-tier guys have. It's not really a surprise to say that, but on the other side, Minnesota State is one of the best, most balanced teams in the country. What I mean by that is just by looking at the stats. They're number 2 in the country in scoring offense. You're going to pull that up too. It's 4.1 goals per game as a team, and number 2 in the country in scoring defense, allowing 1.3 goals per game. There's no other team that can say something like that, which is incredible. So it's also, my last note here is that it's talking about blue bloods in men's college basketball. This is a bad year for the quote-unquote blue bloods of college hockey, the Northeasterners, because none of those schools are in the Final Four. You've got 3 Midwest schools, upper Midwest schools indeed, and a West Coast team in Denver. Now, all 4 of these schools are really good hockey schools. Don't get me wrong. Like, most people have never heard of Minnesota State. That's because men's hockey is their sport, okay? Like, they are elite in men's hockey. But none of those Northeast teams are there. BU, BC, Northeastern, Quinnipiac, none of those schools are in the Final Four, which is interesting to me because the Midwest schools like Michigan, Michigan State, Notre Dame even, and then out west like Denver, and then obviously Minnesota and Minnesota State, those schools have taken over the landscape over the last few years. And it's really interesting to see this sport spread out and become more of a nationwide sport and not just something that you can play in the Northeast where it's cold all the time and if you have some money. People can play it all over the country, and that is really, really exciting for me.
Yeah, I think it's good for the sport. You know what I mean? Having different teams out there, not just up there in the Northeast, to have it all over the place is good for the sport. I'm just looking at the bracket here right now. I'm looking at all these, like you mentioned, all these smaller schools that you kind of mentioned are big, obviously, for hockey. Yeah. Obviously, I'm looking at just teams that already lost, unfortunately. Look at Quinnipiac, a team that's like, oh, yeah, you like Quinnipiac. You know what I mean? That's a team that you don't hear that much, but obviously, hey, they're there in the Frozen Four. You see a team like St. Cloud State and Minnesota Duluth, and it's like all these smaller schools, like you can see it, they're there. Now, just deep diving into the matchups, obviously, like you mentioned, Michigan and Denver, and what do we got? Minnesota State. Obviously, Minnesota State, I have heard of them in hockey at least a little bit before with just their history and everything, and I think that's very important to look at. But obviously, we got 2 Big Ten schools, obviously, Minnesota and Michigan. But they're all cold climate kind of, cold climate, kind of areas still, especially in Denver, even though it can get a little warm still there in Denver. But yeah, I don't know. I think it looks like it's going to be good matchups. If I had to just guess, I'm not, like I said, the total hockey expert for sure. I would probably say, looking at it, Minnesota State. I think there's something about them. And obviously, I think the Minnesota State seems like a rivalry, most likely. Sure. You know what I mean? Seems like a rivalry for both schools being in Minnesota. And then looking at it, I would probably say, I don't know. Even though I don't want to say this team, because yes, if you don't know from the show, I am a big Ohio State fan. But I will pick Michigan, I guess, to beat Denver, just because hearing Tim's talk over there, I was like, it seems like a good offense. So I'll pick those 2 teams in the championship. What you think, Kruck?
Man, the biggest thing that stands out to me is definitely Minnesota State's goalie, Dryden McCray. His percentage in goal is over 90%, and nobody else is even over 80%. He's a whole 10% in goal better than anybody else.
Wow. This
guy, when I tell you he is a brick wall, he doesn't let anything through, which is really tough for him because his team, like Tim talked about it earlier, they're scoring 4.1 goals per game. Well, in the last game they scored 1 goal. So he was getting nervous because he give up one quick one, all of a sudden it's tied. Personally, I'd like to see Michigan and Minnesota State in the finals. I think that would be the best matchup out of any of these. Minnesota, I mean, they're scoring 3.6 a game, but the problem is that they're giving up too many goals in a game. They're not even in the top 10 when it comes to defense, and everybody knows defense wins championships.
Yeah, absolutely, Kruck. Yeah, I could definitely agree with you just looking at it. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the games here on the bracket. 4-3 against Massachusetts. Again, that's definitely a high score there for a hockey game. But obviously, they did beat Western Michigan, 3-0, and they were the number 1 seed, and it looks like on that side of the bracket. And so that's obviously something to keep in mind. Obviously, momentum is very key in, like I said, any sport. You know what I mean? Whether it's you're doing well, and I think that's the thing about Minnesota is I guess you just don't be able to sleep on them still because hey, obviously beating the number 1 seed, they still feel confident about probably beating Minnesota State. But see what happens.
I love the depth of the Michigan offense. Like I said, I mean, that's, again, why they were the favorites going in, and these guys have lived up to it. So we're talking about Brendan Brisson and Matty Beniers most specifically. They're both top 10 in the country in goals per game. They're both top 20 in the country in points per game. Denver does have the nation's leading scorer in total points per game, so that is something to make note of. So, and like you said, I mean, Denver, like you said, Max, Denver is a really, really, really good hockey program. They have turned into an elite hockey and lacrosse program over the last 15 years. But out of nowhere, really. But, I would be surprised still if Michigan were to lose in this round. But, again, those two guys that I just mentioned, Brisson and Beniers, you'll hear them in the NHL before too long if you care to follow. So those guys are stars in the game already is my point. And you mentioned Dryden McKay is having a fantastic season in goal for Minnesota State, top 5 in the country in goals against average and save percentage, in addition to his elite winning percentage that you brought up, which is, I guess, a team stat. But the two individual stats, goals against and save percentage, top 5 in both, which he's the only guy that can say that, I believe. So impressive. That would be my dream final game as well this year, Michigan against Minnesota State.
Who are you taking in that game?
Oh, man. I haven't watched enough to be able to tell you well, but, I mean, off the top of my head, obviously, I keep leaning towards Michigan. They are a favorite team for a reason, so I guess I'll pick them. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's more of a slow-scoring game like you hinted at about Minnesota State's path to the championship, or to the Final Four, I should say. If it's like a 2-1 final, which was the final in the women's championship, by the way, wouldn't be a surprise at all to see that type of final score.
All right, we got one last thing before we wrap it up. NBA, we're getting close to the end of the season. We've already had, looks like 7 teams have been eliminated already. The Thunder and the Rockets are officially out on the Western Conference. And the stage has been set for the Eastern. The teams that are going to make it have been informed. Now it's just a matter of positioning and whether they're in the play-in tournament or the actual tournament. But the Knicks have been eliminated. The Warriors, the Pacers, the Pistons, and the Magic. Max, what happened with your Knicks?
Well, I mean, I guess here's the thing. Anytime we talk about the NBA topic, we have to talk about, my Knicks. I guess they just weren't consistent, Kruck. I guess if you want me to be very honest and truthful with you, they were not consistent the entire year. You know what I mean? And that's obviously not going to work with obviously a team, especially with young stars and young talent. It's just not going to work out with a team overall. Getting to more back on a serious topic about the information. I mean, looking at it at the Eastern Conference, I mean, I still think the Boston Celtics are a team to still watch. And I still think it's because if you look at the Boston Celtics, I mentioned it, I think, a couple shows ago, is that if you look at Jason Tatum and how that team is playing, and obviously momentum, like I mentioned before, is very important in any sport. They are playing right now one of their best ball at the moment right now in their last 10 games, 7-3. That's obviously very important to keep going in the momentum. Milwaukee Bucks, though, you can't sleep on them. They're obviously a team that won it, obviously, from the previous year. They're a team to obviously keep an eye on as well. And you look at it, too, I mean, I think the Sixers are still up there as well. But if I had to pick the favorites right now, I would definitely say the Phoenix Suns, how they're playing. And obviously, Chris Paul is back now, too. Chris Paul is back and healthy. I mentioned that I thought that'd be a problem with the Suns. I thought they would fall off a little bit. But him being back has actually helped the team, not just tremendously. And then the Memphis Grizzlies. I mean, this team, the Memphis Grizzlies, I still think the Memphis Grizzlies are a team to watch. How they're playing right now, they still got Ja Morant. People are still speculative of, is he going to be only that one person to stop? I think they got other players around him. Ja Morant actually has not played in the past couple of games for the Memphis Grizzlies. And the thing is, Desmond Bane, other players on the Memphis Grizzlies are doing a really good job. And they're second place right there overall. So if I had to choose right now, coming out to be I would say the top 2 favorites in both conferences, I would say right now Milwaukee and Boston are the 2 for me in the East. And the Suns, and I think the Grizzlies, even though I like the Mavericks too as well. The Mavericks are doing really good at the moment. I still think there's something about the Memphis Grizzlies this year that's just going to carry them on to possibly win a championship.
It's fascinating to me the way that these standings are shaping up, especially in the Western Conference, because fans of this show know I'm not the biggest NBA fan. But the league is so popular that I can't help but pick up on things. Even though I don't like to sit and watch regular season games through and through. I do watch the playoffs, I do watch the finals, all that stuff every year. But I pick up on things, and I know who all the key players are. With that said, you look at the Memphis Grizzlies roster, they don't have any superstars. I think that is fair to say, except for Ja Morant, obviously. Okay? Obviously. So if I don't know who they are, that means they're probably not either like 10-plus year NBA guys or they're not superstars this year or the previous year. So That's all I'm saying. None of these other guys are superstars. Steven Adams is a multi-year starter, was on the Thunder for a few years, all that stuff. I know. But, other than that, this team doesn't have any mega stars. Jaren Jackson was a former high draft pick. I know him, too. But, you mentioned Desmond Bane. He's not an NBA superstar. So my point of all that is this is a team that is doing it somehow, even with Ja Morant being beat up for the last couple of days. Their best player, unquestionably, out, and they're still the second seed in the West. So and they are a legitimate Western Conference Finals team, which is crazy to me. On the other side of it, I actually watched this game for a little bit while I was doing some other stuff the other day. Miami Heat beat Boston.
That was a good game.
That was just a couple of days ago. So, yeah, you're right. Boston's 7-3 in their last 10, and Miami's just 5-5. But one of those wins was against Boston. So somehow Miami is your number one seed in the East right now, which is a surprise to me. That's not what I would have expected going into this season. So, I mean, they brought in Kyle Lowry. That has helped immensely to go with Jimmy Butler, who is obviously an NBA superstar. That team is really, really good and a lot better than I would have expected going into this season. On the flip side of it, I mean, can we talk about what a failure the Nets have been? They're still on the fringes of the playoffs right now. So we mentioned the Knicks being out, obviously. Got to keep hammering that home, sorry. But if the Nets are likely to be a play-in team, and so there's still a chance, right? So you're saying there's a chance. But if that's what happens, if the Nets are bounced in a play-in game, let's say, how much of a failure is that? With all the stuff that they have, their huge big three, the biggest big three going into this season, all the drama then with James Harden for Ben Simmons, all that stuff, all the Kyrie Irving being forced to sit out, all that stuff. If they don't do anything in the playoffs, they don't even make it, how big of a failure is that? It might even be a bigger failure than how bad the Lakers have been.
Touching on the Nets thing, that's one thing that I think transcends sports about the Nets is Kyrie Irving not budging on his morals and refusing to get the vaccine because he decided he didn't want to get it. And rather than playing and having other people tell him, you have to do it, he had the willpower to not do it. And I mean, some people find it dumb, some people find it whatever. But for me, I think that having enough willpower and just being stern enough not to, budge on it, I think that's really, that is a key thing for just a human to have. Like, not moving on your morals because somebody else convinces you to do it. When you get set in your way, you should remain that way. That's what I believe. But back to basketball, my Chicago Bulls are actually doing really well. They're the 5th seed in the East. I don't see them doing too much in the playoffs. Maybe second round, but nothing crazy. Out of the East, I would like to see the Bucks or the Celtics. Both of those teams impress me. Giannis Antetokounmpo, I got to watch him last year against the Hawks. Went up to a Milwaukee Brewers game, and then someone told us to go stand outside the Forum and just watch the game, so we did that. That was fun. And then, I mean, the Boston Celtics have just always been impressive to me because the big thing I always talk about with the NBA is you have to have 3 superstars, but one of them has to be able to become a role player. He cannot be a superstar. You look at the Lakers, when AD's on the floor, he's trying to be the guy. When LeBron's on the floor, he doesn't have to try. He is the guy. Right. Westbrook, trying to be the guy. Carmelo Anthony, when he's on the floor, every time he gets the ball, he's pulling it because he wants to show people he's still...
Thinks it's 2007 still.
Exactly. He thinks he's still on the Nuggets. I mean, or the Knicks. And
either way.
This Boston Celtics team, Jaylen Brown, he can step up when you need him.
Yeah.
Marcus Smart can step up when you need him. Jason Tatum is always there. He's always being a threat that you have to double team half the time. Robert Williams, if he can get back healthy, I like him as a center because he doesn't need the ball to be effective. He gets down low because as soon as you leave him, he's got an easy 2 points. But on defense, that's where he shines the most.
Oh, yeah.
He's a great defensive center. I think if it came down to it, him versus Nikola Jokic, I think Nikola Jokic is going to have to lean more on his mid-range than his low post because Williams is not going to be afraid of that contact.
I mean, Kruck, just some final things. I like what you mentioned with obviously Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart, those role players overall for the Celtics. I think that's very important to watch as you look at the Celtics going into the playoffs. And I kind of like what Tim mentioned too about teams that have big superstars. You look at the Lakers, a team that's got 3 kind of players, possibly on the brink of not making it into the playoffs.
Crazy.
You look at the Brooklyn Nets, a team that obviously had Harden, obviously lost from the Sixers, but had a team that now KD's back and now healthy, all that kind of jazz. That right now is the situation as Brooklyn could not make the playoffs. Especially, imagine if you don't have KD or LeBron possibly in the playoffs. Think about that just for a second. It would feel weird, right? It would just feel weird. It wouldn't feel right overall. But obviously, it's how it is. And obviously, a team right now that I'm looking on the brink too is Golden State's been falling apart. You look at this team; they've been around 3-7 in the last 10 games. That's another thing to keep an eye on too. So obviously, it's gonna be a good one, Kruck. Right? Both conferences are gonna be good. So I can't wait to see how it plays out here in the final stretch.
All right, that'll do it for this episode of Crunch Time. We'd like to thank you all for tuning in. We love having all of you guys here, especially at the table. Tim, love having you on. Your hockey knowledge is unquestionably the best at this table. Tipton didn't really do much talking, but you know what? The emotional support, it was there. It was felt.
Maybe next time we can get a new sports section that I don't think we've done on Crunch Time before. That I know a little bit about, but I don't think you guys know too much about.
Well, I understand.
We can look into
like NASCAR.
Is that a
like
tease?
NASCAR.
All right.
Maybe. It's
Soon
just
come,
a
everybody.
thought. Soon to come.
All right. Until next time, Kruck, Mad Max. This is Crunch Time. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you around.